NASA and the Space Race, Exploring Ways to Beat the Soviet Union. The United States encountered increased tensions with the Soviet Union after they launched Sputnik on October 4, 1957. U.S. government officials had an exchange of ideas that led to the establishment of the National Space and Aeronautics Administration, or NASA, in 1958. With this new program, the U.S. explored a way to get to the moon with Apollo 11 and made great advances in space technology. The Cold War and Sputnik, encountering tensions with the Soviets. During World War II, German Nazis hired experts to create a rocket that could attack Germany's enemies from a great distance away. This rocket, named V-2, was very large and gave Germany a great advantage when they were at war with their enemies. After World War II, the U.S. hired Wernher von Braun, who was one of the experts who worked on V-2. The Soviets wanted these new rocket technologies, but the U.S. wouldn't reveal their information. Both countries wanted to be the first in space, and needed the German information to perform this task. This increased tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. Americans encountered the problem that the Soviet Union was going to spread communism all over the world after they expanded their country into Eastern Europe. This only increased the tension between the two opposing countries. That is, the kind of worldview, the kind of beliefs, and the social structure that would probably prevail in a state which at once unconquerable and in a permanent state of Cold War with its neighbors. George Orwell, describing the Cold War, 1945. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik, the first satellite to enter space. People all over the world were shocked that the Soviets won the race to put a man-made rocket into orbit. Launching of the Russian satellite is man's first successful attempt to navigate the ocean of space around the Earth. Despite the chagrin of U.S. rocketmen, few disparaged the Russian achievement. In at least three important ways: weight, orbit, and altitude, the Sputnik outclasses the U.S. satellite, which is still on the ground. Time magazine, describing how far ahead the USSR was, 1957.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket. Here, an artist's conception of how the feat was accomplished. A three-stage rocket. Number one, the booster, in the class of an intercontinental missile. Its weight estimated at 50 tons. The smaller second stage took over at 5,000 miles an hour and carried on to the highest point reached. 500 miles up, the artificial moon is boosted to a speed counterbalancing the pull of gravity and released. You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
Sputnik 2 was launched a few months later on November 3, 1957. This satellite was much bigger than Sputnik 1 and it had a passenger, a dog on board named Lakia. In response, the U.S. launched Explorer 1 on January 31, 1958. Explorer 1 was invented by Wernher von Braun, the engineer that made Germany's V-2 rocket. Then, on May 18, 1958, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 3. Weighing 3,000 pounds, Sputnik 3 was the biggest of the three Sputnik satellites. This marked the end of the Soviet Sputnik program, but the beginning of a new program for the United States, NASA. The creation of NASA and the Apollo missions, exploring a way to get to the moon. The U.S. needed a solution to beat the USSR. President Eisenhower and Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson exchanged different thoughts and explored different ideas on how to handle the situation. Eisenhower did not want to enter the space race, but Johnson disagreed. In the end, they finally made an agreement, and in 1958, Congress passed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, creating NASA. The United States created NASA so they could focus on space travel and getting ahead in the space race. With the USSR getting so far ahead in space travel, John F. Kennedy, our next president, thought it would be a good time to launch their next mission.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
John F. Kennedy, declaring that they will go to the moon, 1962. This started the Apollo program. NASA tested and explored equipment and ways to get to the moon with Apollo 7 through 10. These were all manned missions that went to space, but not the moon. On July 16, 1969, 10 years after the establishment of NASA, Apollo 11, a mission that landed 3 men on the moon, launched from Kennedy Space Center in Central Florida. The 3 men on the trip were Neil Armstrong, who was mission commander, Buzz Aldrin, lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins, command module pilot. Some 10 hours after the landing, Armstrong will begin EVA, backing feet first out of the hatch on his belly. On the LM's porch, he will pull a ring that opens a storage area and exposes a mounted TV camera, which will relay to audiences on Earth a view of his awkward progress down LM's ladder. At the bottom, Armstrong will place his right foot in the bowl-shaped footbed and, by 2:22 a.m., if he is on schedule, plant his left foot firmly on the lunar soil. Time magazine, describing the plan for Neil Armstrong's moonwalk, 1969. On July 20th, 1969, at 4:17 p.m., Apollo 11's lunar module landed on the moon.
I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Buzz Aldrin viewed the mission as a great success. The leaders of freedom in the world made a commitment to go to the moon because of the conditions of the Cold War. Buzz Aldrin, telling that the mission was very important because of the Cold War. More Apollo missions followed, including Apollos 12, 14, 16, and 17, which all landed on the moon. Apollo 13 was one of the most arguably famous Apollo missions ever. It planned to go to the moon and launched on April 11, 1970. There was a malfunction in the spacecraft, and workers at NASA had to solve the problem and bring the crew home safely.
Every controller at that time recognized we're not going to the moon, but also it's going to be tough, damn tough, to get the crew of Apollo 13 home.
NASA managed to bring the crew home safely when they splashed down into the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970. The International Space Station, a partnership between countries. After the Apollo missions ended, President Ronald Reagan instructed NASA to build the International Space Station in his 1984 State of the Union address.
Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade. A space station will permit quantum leaps in our research in science, communications, in metals, and in life-saving medicines which can be manufactured only in space. We want our friends to help us meet these challenges and share in their benefits. NASA will invite other countries to participate so we can strengthen peace, build prosperity, and expand freedom for all who share our goals.
The finished International Space Station is about the size of a football field and orbits 240 miles above Earth's surface. Many countries have astronauts come and visit the International Space Station, including Russia. After the USSR launched Sputnik on October 4th in 1957, the US encountered tensions with the Soviet Union. To solve this problem, President Eisenhower and Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson explored different thoughts. Finally, in 1958, the U.S. established NASA. NASA landed the first man on the moon with Apollo 11 and made many great achievements in space technology.